want to comment on that because, in fact, we did have the opportunity just last night. One of our members had an opportunity to go and present himself as a representative of NUVA to the student government, and it was actually the student government body that initiated the request to have a representative come, and so I think that your insight is right on, because I think there's a desire on the community to build that bridge in and of itself. And one of our charges within the developing vision for the organization is to be a conduit between the campus and the community at large, to be able to foster those types of what the American Legion likes to call a 100% Americanism, and so it's interesting. And in fact, if I can transition, I think it was Teddy Roosevelt who once said, that there's no such thing as an Italian American or a Polish American. You're an American, and we need a 100% Americanism. It was President Roosevelt who said that. So as an American, as an Israeli veteran, and kind of looking at that perspective, I'm wondering if you could continue along that line with that perspective.
Actually, it's interesting that I'll come back to that in a second, but it's
Sure.
interesting to the question that you said that people ask, how many people you killed, because my students, that's usually the first question they ask me over lunch.
Mm-hmm.
How many people did you kill? And then I usually say, well, none apart from my soldiers. But which is true, by the way. But it's interesting. That's kind of since many of them that's probably one of the first soldiers they meet.
Yeah.
That's the question. Now the perspective that I'm going to bring, and I'll sort of transition between 2 to 3.
Sure.
The second question is, I teach here at the business school, so I see primarily people that already had their undergraduate, went to the military, and then came to do their degree. Their second degree. So it's a very different audience, I should say, admittedly. So I will not repeat many of the things that you said here, even though I see that as well. But if you read it a little bit, you read it in the news, you see that actually business schools increase the number of veterans they have. Mm-hmm. I think last year Harvard had 3% of their new coming class are veterans, and so I can see why they bring different things that our usual customers, so to speak, don't bring. They bring leadership, and I'm transitioning it to this. I'm just saying, what's the next question? Your next
Sure.
question is going to be on advice.
What advice would you give
Yes.
to the student veterans and to those of us that support? So feel free to continue
So
through.
it's continued because I think, to me, one of the key things, and I think it's very much related to what both Don and Rodrigo and Peter said, it's about knowing how to articulate what's your experience and not trying to tell a story that's not your story.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's what you bring to the classroom, and what you bring to campus. It's about leadership. First of all, leadership. Usually you went to the military, it's about civic responsibility, it's about the fact that you feel part of society, part of the community, and want to be a leader in that community, and then you must bring it to where you are. The second thing, which is, I think, for me, probably the most important thing, is resilience. Most people that went through the military are significantly more resilient than the people we see on campus. And you must bring it. To me, I never slept more than 10 hours a week throughout my military service. And when a student comes to say, I just couldn't complete that because I had to go to sleep, I'm not telling him their story anymore, but it's very clear that,
But he's not a veteran.
I know he's not a veteran. And I'll give you an example. I demand my students to be on time, and if you're not on time, you cannot enter class. Period. And period. And then they can try to think why that is. That's related to my experience and to the place where I've been, in which people go to the plane in one line and in 4 minutes. But that's exactly what if you were in the military, that's what you bring. You bring this. The fact that you are ready for what the world brings. And I was speaking this week with the general manager of Nissan, and I was talking with people, very high people in Facebook and Microsoft, and what they said, what we need people that can pull their sleeves and work. We don't have many of these. If we see we go to your campuses, and people like to think, which is great. And people like to strategize, which is even better. But we see very few people that are willing to work.
Action.
Actually go to the shop floor, and you can be a great, and we are a marketing school, so you can be a great marketing officer, chief marketing officer down the road if you've done nothing but marketing. But if you want to be the CEO, you want to be the leader of the company, you must be able to do everything. And I think if I look at the veterans in my class, all of them are people that if you send them now to Nashville to be on the shop floor of Nissan, they will do that. And they're proud of doing that, and they communicate that they're willing to do that. But that's something that you need to communicate. And the last thing, and that's where the experience and many of the things you brought, is the complexity or the ability to handle complexity. I think that's something that veterans bring and should definitely amplify. As they talk about, the world does not become simpler. And if you came for 5 years in Morgan Stanley, not you, but when people that we see, graduated from high school, went to Princeton, 3 years in Goldman Sachs, 2 years in a private equity, now they're here back. Their world is very linear. They don't, when we talk about complexity, they can imagine what's the complexity for someone else. But the ability to handle people, the ability to handle stressful situations, the ability to handle situations where you don't know what's going to be next, that's something that definitely veterans bring, but they need to understand that that's what they bring. And I think, to me, that's kind of the main thing and I think at Kellogg what we try to do as part of the veterans is to try to communicate that before you even write your essays coming to school. Because you cannot you cannot get into school unless you are able to communicate why, even though you don't have the 5 years in Goldman Sachs. And in the finance classes, you're going to be the last one in class because you don't know what NPV is. Even though all the rest of your classmates are what we call Excel monkeys. But you bring something else, and you need to. That's our jargon.
I spoke to one of those yesterday, so that's why I'm just laughing.
That's great.
But to me, that's what veterans bring, and that's what they definitely need to articulate coming in.
Sure. Professor Slevin, what would you, being a non-veteran, right? What would you say to the faculty or to the administration? Of what advice would you give to them so that they can do the things that enable the veteran to do what, to be able to articulate, to be able to present themselves, to support that effort? What advice would you give to us?
Yeah, it's a great question, Paul. And there's so many possibilities and so many ways of thinking about it. It's hard to know where to start. Rodrigo mentioned first simply dealing with veterans who are in school here, and faculty being flexible. And Paul, you had sort of said the same thing, that maybe it was, I guess it was you, Paul, who was talking about the importance of flexibility and faculty understand what you're going through and how it relates. And Gad obviously deals with some of this with his own students, seeing their strengths and advertising those. I think to the extent that there can be conversations that embrace, to use John's word, veterans, and help understand both veterans to be understood and therefore appreciated, and then non-veterans and non-aspiring military to know what it's all about, can be very good things. But it probably has to happen in small, kind of individual ways. When you have a big university initiative that says we're going to do a week of this, it just sort of dissipates. And so as limited as this may seem, I wonder if there aren't, the way to go isn't 6 specific initiatives, or not even initiatives, but just 6 specific ways in. And that could be, a freshman seminar that teaches some kids, because you're not going to get everybody all the time. But if you can begin to expand the circle. I know in my own classes at Medill and in Weinberg, I do try, I've taught a class on national security and some stuff on foreign policy. And I always make sure that I include make some effort for students to understand not just military policy or for the media, for journalism students, how to cover a press conference at the Pentagon, but how to talk the language and how to recognize the faces and the voices and the experiences. So any way that one has to have a case study at Kellogg that involves a military subject, or a journalism assignment that involves going to talk to family support groups,
Yeah.
that kind of thing is a possibility.
Cross-pollination,
Just
sort of
any way you can find-
interdisciplinary type studies.
Yeah, just little ways just to kind of slip it in
Yeah.
before anybody notices.
Sure. Dr. Cathro?
Same question?
Yeah. What advice would you give to, I mean, we have a mix. I mean, I know there's veterans in the audience. I know there's faculty in the audience. I know there's
even both.
a whole host of people that are going to watch this on YouTube later. Whoever you want to speak to.
Okay, but I'm curious, how many veterans are there in the audience? Nice. Thank you. Thank you. Well, the advice I would give the veterans is find a way to integrate yourself into the system here. And that means it's not just going to classes. Being part of the university is not just going to classes. There's extracurricular side of it. Extracurricular activities are the